for today is we're going to finish the worksheet that we started last class period. We only have a little bit to go. And if you remember, guys, I was calling these basic problems because they had kind of pretty straightforward shifters, only one shifter. They didn't involve any of the more difficult graphical things like quotas and tariffs. But after we get through these, we're going to move on to some more difficult practice problems. Remember what I said, guys. It is crucial that you get these ceteris paribus assumptions learned, okay? That if you don't know your ceteris paribus assumptions, this becomes much, much more difficult, okay? So let me get the roll sheet going while we're doing this. All right. All right, so guys, back to the practice problems we started last class period. So we left off at number 6. So let's look at number 7. And we're going to finish this up quick and then move on. So number 7 says, government announces that a new green energy subsidy program will begin in January of next year. So guys, announces, right? What do you think I'm trying to signal to you in terms of ceteris paribus when I say they announce something? Change in price, but the fact that it's an announcement, yeah, so there's a change in price, but what specific word should I be thinking about when government announces something and it affects kind of the whole market? Expectations, good. Expectations of future prices, exactly. So government announces a new green energy subsidy will begin January of next year, so it's not happening yet. It's in the future. Consumers of hybrid and alternative fuel vehicles will be eligible for a 40% rebate on the purchase price. How will this impact both the current and future markets for green cars? So remember the 3 steps that we're going to use. The first step is indicate our shock. And so the shock here, we said consumers expect price to do what in the future? Go up or down? Everybody, go up or down? Go down, right? If you're getting a subsidy, 40% rebate, you're getting a reduction in price. So consumers expect price to go down in the future. So that's our ceteris paribus assumption. And you were asked to draw graphs for what this does to the current market and to the future market. So let's look at the current market and also the future market. Now, I don't want to put these on the same graph because these are literally different markets, right? So demand and supply, demand and supply. Remember, we don't shift anything until we've labeled fully. All right. So remind me, guys, we think that price is going to go down in the future, right? And where did that decrease came from? Came from this subsidy program that's been announced. So if you're in the market for a green car, when do you want to buy it? Now, or do you want to buy it in the future? Do I want to buy it now or in the future? Because this doesn't take place till January, right? So what's going to happen to the current market for green cars, guys? First of all, does this sound like a demand shock or a supply shock? Is this a demand? Does this sound like a demand shifter or a supply shifter? Which one? A demand shifter, right? Because we're talking about consumers. So if consumers think price is going down in the future, what do they want to do now in the current market? What happens to demand? Do we agree that demand's going to go down in the current market But what's going to happen in the future market? Demand's going to do what? Demand's going to go up, right? So that's how the ceteris paribus assumption works. If we think prices will be higher in the future, we want to decrease our demand now, increase our demand later. So in the market currently, we're going to see a decrease in demand. So people are going to wait. We've shifted our demand curve to the left, right? So P1, Q1. If we're talking about the future market, then demand's going to go up. And notice how I'm labeling my demand curve something new, right? So D0 to D1 or D to D1. And here price goes up and quantity goes up. So remember the last step. The last step asks you to talk about effect on equilibrium price and quantity. So in the current market, do we agree equilibrium price is going to go down? Everyone agree with that? But equilibrium quantity is also going down. But in the future market, we see that equilibrium price is going to go up and equilibrium quantity is going to go up. So guys, we get different answers, right? Depending on if we're talking about the current market or if we're talking about the future market. So you have to read carefully. In this question, I asked you for both, but I might ask you just the future market or just the current market, and you have to read the question carefully, which some of you are not doing on tests, to know exactly what you're answering, right? So guys, this is an easy question, right? The only thing that was difficult here is figuring out what the ceteris paribus assumption is. When I talk about an announcement for something in the future, that's probably the indication to you that we're talking about expectations of future prices. Any questions on this one? All right, so number 8, a governmental report comes out suggesting that, contrary to previous studies, consumption of red wine increases the risks of certain types of cancer in people over 40. Based on this, how will the market for red wine be impacted? All right, everyone needs to work on this problem. So I want you to follow the 3 steps. I want to see everybody working. I'll read it again. Some of you didn't bring your handout with you. A government report suggests consumption of red wine increases the risks of certain kinds of cancer. Okay, so a report suggests that red wine increases the risk of cancer. And the question says, in people over 40, based on this, how will the market for red wine be impacted? Okay, and I want to see everybody working. So again, first thing you have to do is figure out the ceteris paribus assumption. Second, draw the graph. 3, summarize. Effect on equilibrium price and quantity. You're always going to follow those 3 steps. So guys, does this sound more like a demand shock or a supply shock? Demand. All right, so if you were getting lost in the ceteris paribus, this looks like something that directly affects demanders. So look down your demand shifters and figure out which one is the most relevant demand shifter? And there could be two. Might be hard to choose between two of them. All right, so guys, what demand shifter did you come up with? What's the ceteris paribus assumption here? Preferences, probably. So preferences, I can't just write preferences. What do I need to write? Preferences get weaker, right? So demand goes down for red wine. What might have been another option? I probably would have accepted a second answer. Is this expectations? No, because remember, expectations is where I'm telling you price is going to change. Am I telling you price is going to change here? No. Remember, because it's not expectations, it's expectations of future prices, right? You got to remember that part. So what do you think it might be? Number of demanders. So I probably would have taken that too. Number of demanders does what? Goes down. Good. So guys, remember, if on a test you just give me number of demanders, that's not enough. If you just give me preferences, that's not enough. You have to be very specific. All right, so both of those, preferences getting weaker, number of demanders go down. Those are both hard to separate. So either one would have been okay with this. All right, so now everyone needs to draw the graph. So everyone draw the graph. Remember, you need to label the market. So this is the market for red wine. You need to label your axes. And remember, you're not going to shift anything until you label your equilibrium, price, and quantity. So everyone finish that graph? So which way did you shift your demand curve, everyone? You shifted your demand curve to the left. Good. You labeled it something new, D1. All right. So summarize the effect on price and quantity. Everyone take a second. Finish step 3. Equilibrium, price, and quantity. What happens? Price goes down. Good. What happens to quantity? Goes down. Good. All right. Super easy, right? Okay. So we're finished with the first handout, right? Is there anything out of those problems that are difficult? No. But do you agree that you have to know your shifters? If you don't know your shifters, this gets really tricky, right? All right. So I'm now going to pass out to you a second set. It should be back in front. Make sure you have it back in the front. Everyone have one? Can you pass the axes back up? Do we have any axes? All right, you just pass it back up front, please. All right, so guys, these problems are maybe a little bit more challenging only because they connect. Maybe I have multiple parts to one question or multiple shots. So question number 1 says, suppose our government imposes quotas on sugar imported from sugar-producing countries such as the Dominican Republic. Illustrate how this affects the market for foreign sugar in the U.S. So guys, this would be the market for foreign sugar in the U.S., not all sugar, because now we're putting a quota, but it only affects foreign sugar. So the first thing I ask you for, remember, is to give me the ceteris paribus assumption or the shifter. But quotas are one of those others, right? It's on that list of other shifters. So it's not a CPA, but it also affects supply. So all you have to do is say quota imposed And guys, when we impose a quota, is that a demand shifter or a supply shifter? Supply. What does supply do when we impose a quota? Goes down. So we're going to say the supply of foreign sugar in the U.S. goes down, right? Supply of foreign sugar in the U.S. goes down. But you have to have some kind of statement like that. You have to make sure I'm understanding what you're doing. All right. So now we're going to learn how to draw a quota. Let's start in equilibrium, price P0 and quantity Q0. But to draw a quota, I can't just shift supply. It's not just a supply shift. So let's talk about how to draw a quota. So first, we have to decide our quota level. Let's let the quota be imposed at some quantity. So let's impose the quota at quantity Q hat. So we're only going to let Q hat units into the country. Okay? Now, what do we know about Q hat compared to Q0? What's the point of the quota? Do we want Q hat to be above Q0 or below Q0? What's the point here? When we impose a quota, are we trying to get more foreign sugar or less foreign sugar? The whole point is we're trying to get what? Guys, come on, we had a unit on this. When we impose sugar quotas, it's because we want what? More foreign sugar or less foreign sugar? We want less, right? So if the point of a quota is to have less, and right now we have Q0, then what do I know? Q hat needs to be less than Q0. Everyone agree with that statement? The whole point is that we want less sugar from foreign countries. Okay, so we want less foreign sugar. Okay. Now we also know that at Q hat, the level of the quota, quantity is fixed. So when we get to Q hat, that's the maximum. It's fixed. You can't have more than that. And to illustrate a fixed supply, and you might want to get your notes out to get this into your notes. But to illustrate a fixed supply, we need a vertical supply curve. Okay? We need a vertical supply curve. So if we're trying to fix something, some quantity, we need a vertical supply curve. For example, I might say that we have 500 units and only 500 units. So my supply curve is vertical. Everybody with me? But the other thing we need to understand is that below Q hat, if we're below Q hat, then the quota isn't binding. So if we're below Q hat and the quota's not binding, well then the supply curve looks normal. So what this means is my supply curve is going to have two parts. It's going to look one way below the quota of Q hat, and it's going to look another way when we get to Q hat, because the quota will now be binding. Okay? So we have to learn how to draw a quota correctly, because it's not going to affect supply until we hit the quota amount. So let's come into our graph and put in our quota, and let's say that our quota is going to be Q hat. And now let's draw a dotted line as our reference line. So below Q hat, we just said that the quota is not binding. So if the quota is not binding below Q hat, then our supply curve is going to look just like it did before. But as soon as we get to Q hat, the quota is binding, right? It's going to limit quantity, at which point quantity becomes vertical. The supply curve becomes vertical because quantity is fixed. So we now have this new supply curve. I'm going to call it S1, and it's kinked. So we have a kinked supply curve. Not difficult, right? Makes sense. So understand it's kinked at the quota amount. Below the quota is not relevant. So the supply curve looks just like it did before. As soon as we get to the quota amount, you can't have any more than that, supply becomes vertical. So we now need to label our new equilibrium. Well, our new equilibrium, right, we were here. Where's our new equilibrium point? It's going to be where our new supply curve intersects demand, right? So our new equilibrium is here at E1. So that gives us a new price, P1. And of course, we know what our new quantity is, right? Our new quantity is right here at Q hat. Now, guys, before we finish this question, I want to point out something. Don't draw this on your graph. But for whatever reason, a lot of people want to come here and tell me this is the equilibrium. Is that an equilibrium point? No, because an equilibrium has to be what? An intersection between supply and demand, right? At that equilibrium, which is not an equilibrium, but let's say you accidentally on a test go to that kink and you say that's the equilibrium. What just happened to price when you make that error? You've got price going down. Is that what quotas do? Do they make prices go down? So this is what I mean by you've got to use your intuition. If you get something where quotas make prices go down, you would know that something has gone wrong. All right, so let's finish this question. So step 3 asks for the equilibrium price and quantity. What's the impact? So what has the quantity, I mean, what has the quota done to equilibrium price? It's done what? Gone up. Everyone agree the quota has made price go up. And it's made quantity do what? Decrease. Good. But you have to draw it correctly. All right? You have to draw it correctly. So if you didn't write any of that down, and I see some of you not writing any of that down, guys, you're going to be responsible for being able to draw a quota correctly, okay? All right, so we just imposed a quota on foreign sugar, and it made the price of foreign sugar go up, right? So now let's look at the next question. It says, given the information in 1, illustrate how the quota, again on foreign sugar, impacts the market for domestic sugar. So take a moment and everyone answer this question. Now, I want to see everybody working. Some of you are sitting there doing nothing. So I want to see everyone practicing. And remember, on test 2, you're going to have problems like this. It will not all be multiple choice. So remember what we just learned. Foreign sugar has an increase in price. So remember what we just took away from that last question. The quota made foreign sugar more expensive. So think about what that's going to do to domestic sugar. So guys, is this a demand shifter or a supply shifter? Supply or demand? Well, what's the connection? You need to ask yourself, what is the connection between foreign sugar and domestic sugar? What is the connection between foreign sugar and domestic sugar? They are what? They're substitutes, right? They're substitutes, guys. You've got to be able to figure out these ceteris paribus relationships. They are substitutes. So you would want to say that price of a substitute to domestic sugar has gone up, right? Everyone agree with that statement? These are substitutes. Foreign sugar and domestic sugar are substitutes, close substitutes. So we make sugar in the United States, they make sugar in the Dominican Republic. And so now the price of a substitute to our sugar has gone up. Yeah. It's not a preference. The most direct impact is that it's price of a substitute. So it's not preference. Because preference is I feel more strongly or weakly about consuming something. It's not a price story, right? You're telling a price story here. So this is not a preference story. So price of a substitute domestic sugar has gone up. So guys, what's going to happen to the demand for domestic sugar here? Demand for domestic sugar is going to go what? What direction? Up. Good. All right. So everyone draw this really quickly and answer part 3. But guys, if we can't get part 1, it gets very challenging. So we got to practice. Make sure you've labeled your market. So this is the market for domestic sugar. So American made. All right, so label all your stuff, label your equilibrium. So guys, which way did you shift your demand curve? To the right. And you labeled your new equilibrium, P1, Q1. So what's the impact on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? Price has done what, everyone? Gone up. So American sugar, they make a little more money because price has gone up. What about quantity exchanged? They went up. All right, so guys, remember how I said you've got to look back at your answer and make sure it makes intuitive sense. So let's go back and make sure that our answer makes sense. So in the first question, we had a quota. We imposed a trade barrier, a quota on foreign sugar. And we see, oops, sorry, go back. And we see there we go. So here's our quota. So foreign sugar got more expensive. And that's intuitive, right? Because that's what quotas are supposed to do, right? Quotas are trying to make the foreign product more expensive. And we also see that fewer units or pounds or tons of foreign sugar is exchanged. And isn't that also the point of the quota? So I can feel pretty confident that I got this one right because the answer matches my intuition. Then on the next question, we said, okay, foreign sugar has gotten more expensive. What in the world? All right, it won't let me do anything in the corner, so my apologies. So foreign sugar has gotten more expensive, right? Right here. Price of a substitute to domestic sugar has gone up. So people, basically, what we're saying is here is that people, firms, are substituting towards domestic sugar. That's really what we're talking about here. This is a substitution effect. We're moving away from the higher price and moving towards the lower price substitute. And as a result, our farmers get a higher price. and they sell more. So guys, does that match our intuition? Is that why we might put a quota on foreign sugar so that our farmers can get better prices and sell more? Because we can't compete in sugar, remember? So if we can't compete in sugar, then we have trade barriers to protect our producers. Not saying it's right or wrong, it's just how it works, okay? All right. So now there's a third part of the question. It says, given the information in 1, illustrate how sugar quotas affected the market for corn sweetener. So now we're in the market for corn sweetener. So you have to figure out what's the connection here. How does corn sweetener connect to domestic sugar and foreign sugar? What's the connection here? What's the connection? Is it a price of an input? Do we make corn sweetener from sugar? No, we make it from corn. So it's not an input. Is this a preference thing? No. Is it number of demanders? No. Does it sound like technology? No. So what does it sound like it is? There are substitutes, right? Remember the lecture? We talked about that Coca-Cola has moved from sugar to corn sweetener because of the price. So we want to make a note that corn sweetener and sugar are substitutes. And remember, sugar, both foreign sugar and domestic sugar, what has happened to price? It's gone which direction? Price of foreign sugar's done what? Gone up. Price of domestic sugar now has done what? What's happened to the price of domestic sugar, guys? Look at your last question. It's gone up, right? So sugar prices have gone up. So what's going to happen? People are going to substitute towards corn sweetener, right? So people are going to substitute towards corn sweetener. Right? So people are going to substitute towards corn sweetener. So what's our CPA? How do I write it, guys? I need to say that price of a substitute to what? To sugar? To corn sweetener, right? Because that's what we're modeling now. Price of a substitute to corn sweetener has gone up, right? In other words, sugar. So is this a demand shock or a supply shock in the market for corn sweetener, folks? Demand. So the demand for corn sweetener has gone up, right? So remember, some of this demand is firms, right? So some of this increased demand is from firms. And we gave you an example, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola moved towards demanding corn sweetener for use in their product instead of demanding sugar. Everybody with me? Does that make sense? All right. So everyone take a second and graph it. Make sure you're labeling your market. So market for corn sweetener. So which way are we shifting our demand curve? To the right. All right, so you've labeled everything carefully. So what has happened to the price of corn sweetener? It increased. Good. What happened to the quantity exchanged? It increased. So guys, are corn sweetener producers better off? Are they? Yeah. Corn sweetener producers, they're getting a higher price And they're selling more. Aren't they better off?
Yes.
Yeah. So corn sweetener producers sell more and at a higher price. So what can we conclude about the quotas on sugar? Did it help them or hurt them? Did it help them or hurt them? Guys, did the quota on sugar help corn sweetener producers or not? Yeah, so the quota on sugar helped them, right? And why did it help them? Because it increased the demand for their product. So guys, you've got to be able to think through these. Okay? Got to be able to think through these. All right. Number 4. Number 4 is talking about a tariff. As part of a trade war, the United States decides to increase tariffs on, or we could just make it simple, impose tariffs on Japanese luxury vehicles. Illustrate how the tariff will impact the market for Japanese luxury vehicles in the U.S. All right, so now we need to learn how to draw a tariff. Remind me, what's a tariff, guys? A tax on what? Good. It's a tax on imports. Good. So we're imposing a tariff. Remember, the tax is on the import. And if you remember the lectures, tariffs and quotas have the same effect. Are they supply shocks or demand shocks? They're supply. And everyone remember that they make supply go down, right? So it's a form of a trade barrier. Remember, it's a type of trade barrier. So the whole point of both tariffs and quotas, since they are trade barriers, is to decrease supply of the import. So our import here is Japanese luxury vehicles, but we're talking about in the U.S. So we can only tax the ones coming to us. So these are Japanese luxury vehicles in the U.S., and that's important. We can't just say all of them, because the tariff only applies to the ones that are imported by us. Okay? So label your supply and demand and your equilibrium price and quantity. Okay. And let's, just for simplicity, say that the tariff is $500 per vehicle. We're going to use just the simplest type of tariff. And the simplest type of tariff is this kind, where it's just a fixed amount for every unit. We can make it more sophisticated. We're not interested. Okay? Now, the first thing for us to be able to draw this clearly is that we need to first understand that our supply curve really is a marginal cost curve. That supply curve captures marginal cost. So don't you agree that when we add a tariff, it's kind of like increasing the marginal cost on each unit? Because there's a new kind of cost. Does that make sense to everyone? So if you think about it kind of like a marginal cost, every single unit now has this additional $500. So at every point, then this supply curve has to shift up vertically by the amount of the tariff. So we need to label the tariff vertically. We need to label the tariff vertically. Why vertically, guys? We only have 2 dimensions. What are the 2 dimensions on our graph? Price, quantity, right? Which one is the tariff more like? Is it a quantity or is it a price? So you got to remember, it has to be measured across against the vertical axis, because the vertical axis measures dollars. Right? Price is a dollar figure. If I try to measure it this way, that would make no sense. If I try to measure it horizontally, Now I'm going across quantity, and that makes no sense. So what's the effect of the tariff? The tariff has shifted the supply curve vertically. Mine's not quite so pretty. Let's see if I can do that better. So it should be a vertical shift, parallel shift, like that. So I have a new supply curve, S1. So the tariff creates a vertical and parallel shift. So make sure you're taking some notes. But guys, I want to be very clear. If I give you a problem that has a tariff, you need to label the tariff. All right? Any problem that asks you about a tariff, you're going to have to label the tariff to get full credit, and you're going to have to label it correctly, measuring vertically. Does that make sense to everyone? Why it has to be measured vertically? Because it's a dollar figure, so I have to measure it against the vertical axis. So now, after the tariff, we're at our new equilibrium, price P1 and quantity Q1. So step 3, summarize the effect on equilibrium price and quantity. So what did the tariff do to equilibrium price, guys? Made it go up, right? And what happened to equilibrium quantity? Decreased. Now, remember what we said, use your intuition. Make sure it matches what you know about tariffs. What's the point of tariffs? It's a form of protectionism, right? It's a trade barrier. So the tariff increased the price of the import. Is that what's supposed to happen, guys? Is that the point of imposing a tariff? We want the foreign product to be higher priced, and we see fewer units exchanged. And that also matches our intuition, right? So we need to make sure that our answer matches our intuition. So far, so good? Makes sense? All right. So next question. Five says, illustrate how the tariff detailed in 4 impacts the market for German luxury vehicles in the United States. So everyone answer this question. After we impose the tariff, based on what we've learned about the tariff, how does this affect the market for German luxury vehicles? All right, so how did the tariff impact the market for German luxury vehicles? So guys, what's our ceteris paribus assumption here? Price of substitutes. You see, that's going to be a really common one, right? Because there are a lot of substitution effects, right? So we need to say that price of a substitute to German luxury vehicles, because that's what we're modeling, has done what? Has increased. Good, right? Where did that come from? That came from the tariff that we imposed on the Japanese luxury vehicles, which made them more expensive. So is this a demand shock or a supply shock? Demand. So the demand for German vehicles is going to do what? Go up. So guys, if that's too abstract for you, then make a little note to yourselves. And on a test, if you need to do this, that's fine, but you need to give me a ceteris paribus assumption. But if you said that German and Japanese cars are substitutes, and then we saw that Japanese vehicle prices went up, so people substitute toward German vehicles. All right, that makes sense. Everybody with me? All right, so everyone can draw this graph. Let's just do it really quickly. All right, make sure you've labeled it, that this is the market for German luxury vehicles in the U.S. And which way did you shift your demand curve, everyone? To the right. Good. Here's demand 1. Price P1 and price Q1. I mean, quantity Q1. Duh. So what happened to equilibrium price, everybody? It went up. Good. And what happened to equilibrium quantity? It went up. So German luxury vehicles, they're the winner, right? So did they have anything to do with the tariff? No, but they're that unintended winner, kind of like corn sweetener was when we imposed a quota on sugar, right? All right,